What you're about to hear will stop you in your tracks, because this story isn't ordinary, not even close. One moment, one decision, and a truth so intense it will stay with you long after the final word. If you love emotional, shocking, and unforgettable stories that pull you in from the very first second, then make sure you hit subscribe, share this video, and drop a comment below to tell me how it hit you. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Now get ready, because this one will grab you by the heart and not let go. Let's start the story. I never expected to open my eyes and find an Apache woman on top of me, staring down with a gaze so sharp it felt like a blade pressed to my throat. Her knees pinned my ribs, her dark hair framed my face, and her breath hit my skin like warm wind off the desert stones. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. But the weight of her, the intensity in her eyes, and the silence in my cabin told me this was real, too real. And the reason she gave for what she was doing left me stunned, speechless, and forever changed. The night before had been long, heavy, and carved with exhaustion. I had found her collapsed in the canyon, half-conscious, wounded, and alone. She was barely breathing when I carried her onto my horse, her blood soaking through my shirt as I rode through dead silence, worried she might slip away before dawn. I laid her in my bed, cleaned her wounds, and sat beside her until my eyes refused to stay open. I must have fallen asleep without meaning to, because when the morning came, she was no longer the fragile woman I rescued. She was a fierce spirit, reclaiming her place in the world. When I realized she wasn't attacking me, I still didn't dare move. Her eyes studied me as if searching not just my face but something beneath it, something hidden. There was no fear in her, no panic, only purpose. The sunlight streaming through the shutters made her eyes glow like embers. She placed her hand lightly on my cheek, testing, confirming, measuring my breath. Her fingertips were warm, trembling not from weakness, but from a certainty I didn't understand yet. I asked her quietly what she was doing, but she didn't answer. She simply stared deeper, as if reading truth from silence. When she finally spoke, it was soft enough that I almost missed it. She said she needed to see my breath, to feel the life inside my chest, to make sure I was real and not a trick of the spirits. Her English carried an old rhythm, steady but accented, every word shaped by history. She climbed off me slowly, still watching me as though expecting me to vanish. Her movements were careful, graceful, even in pain. I sat up slowly, not wanting to startle her. She winced as she placed her hand over the fresh bandage I had wrapped the night before, then looked around the cabin, taking in every detail. She looked at the bowl of water I used to clean her wounds, the cloth strips laid neatly on the table, the blanket tucked around her while she slept. Her expression changed, softening just enough for me to see the storm behind it calm. When she finally turned back to me, her gaze held a depth that made the air around us still. She said she didn't expect kindness from a stranger, especially out here, especially after the violence she had endured. Her voice wavered once, not from fear, but from memory. She whispered her name, Nayeli, and for a moment the room felt different, almost sacred. I asked her what had happened to leave her half dead in the canyon. She hesitated, her eyes drifting to the window as if the sun itself might steal her words. When she spoke, it was with quiet strength. 3 days earlier, she had been gathering herbs when men she didn't recognize captured her, white men traveling through lands they had no right to enter. They demanded she guide them to her tribe's camp. When she refused, they beat her. She escaped only by throwing herself down a rocky slope, injuring her side. She spent hours crawling, hiding, running until her body could no longer carry her. That was where I found her. As she spoke, her voice hardened in moments and softened in others, like a river shifting between rapids and calm pools. She told me she didn't expect to live through the night and had prepared herself to die under the sky of her people. When footsteps approached mine, she thought it was the men returning to finish what they started. She had no strength to run, no hope to fight, no breath to scream. When she realized she was being lifted instead of dragged, she didn't understand. Her people had taught her that nothing in this land comes without cost. But when dawn broke and she woke in my cabin, wrapped and cared for, she felt something she didn't expect: safety. After telling me this, she touched the bandage on her side and took a long breath. The silence between us wasn't heavy, it was grounding. I told her she was safe here, that the men who hurt her were long gone. She nodded slowly, but the tension in her shoulders didn't fade. Trust wasn't something she offered freely, and I respected that. I asked if she wanted food or water, but she shook her head. Instead, she looked directly at me, her eyes steady in a way that made my heart beat slow. She said she needed to understand the man who saved her. She needed to read my spirit the way her people had for generations. I didn't understand at first, but she explained that in her culture, waking in the care of someone after coming so close to death meant their spirits had crossed paths. She had been on top of me not to harm me, not to test my strength, but to feel my breath, to study my soul, to make certain the life she had been given back was placed in the hands of someone whose intentions were clean. She said that breath carries truth and spirit sits beneath the heartbeat. She needed to see both up close. I had never heard anything like that in my life, and the weight of her words settled into me like a stone dropped in deep water. I told her she didn't owe me anything, that helping her was not something I did for reward, but she shook her head firmly, eyes locked on mine. She said very few men ride into Apache territory out of pure goodness. Fewer still take a wounded woman into their home and protect her without expectation. In her eyes, what I did wasn't a simple act of kindness, it was something sacred. I felt heat rise in my chest at her words, not from pride, but from the sincerity behind them. She had been through hell, and yet she looked at me with gratitude so genuine, I didn't know how to respond. When she tried to stand, her body trembled. I stepped forward instinctively, catching her before she fell. Her hand gripped my arm, strong despite her injuries. For a moment we stood close, breathing the same air, the space between us warm. She thanked me again, not with words this time, but with a look that carried more weight than any language could. I helped her outside for fresh air. The sun glowing over the land like molten gold. She stood quietly, eyes closed, letting the wind touch her face. There was a peace in her posture that hadn't been there moments earlier. As the sun climbed higher, she told me more about her tribe, her people, her role as a healer in training. She explained how the herbs she'd been gathering were meant for a ceremony. She told me about the mountains where her band lived, the rivers they protected, and the stories carved into their traditions. Her voice took on a softness when she spoke of home, a softness that reminded me of something I hadn't felt in years. I realized how starved I'd been for conversation, for company, for warmth in a life shaped mostly by silence. When she asked if I had a family, I paused. I told her no, not anymore. She didn't ask what happened, and I appreciated that more than she knew. Some stories are better left untouched. She nodded gently, her eyes carrying a quiet understanding. For a moment, we both stood there saying nothing, simply sharing a silence that felt strangely comfortable, like the world had decided to stop rushing just long enough for us to breathe. As noon approached, she said she needed to return to her people. My instinct was to offer to ride with her to ensure her safe passage, but she looked at me with a firm, knowing expression. If I stepped onto her tribe's land with her, the men would assume I'd taken her against her will. Even if she defended me, they would not trust a stranger who crossed into sacred ground. I nodded, accepting the truth in her words, though a part of me hated the idea of letting her walk away alone. Before she left, she stepped close again, closer than before. Her hand rose slowly and rested over my heart. Her touch was light but grounding, a connection I felt all the way through my ribs. She whispered that the life I returned to her was not a small thing, that her people believed all acts of profound kindness created a bond between spirits. She said one day I would need help. When that time came, I should call her name in my heart, and the wind would carry my voice to her. I didn't know whether she meant it literally or symbolically, but the seriousness in her eyes told me she believed every word. She walked a few steps away, then stopped and turned back. She told me the real reason she had been on top of me, the real reason she hovered over my chest before sunrise. She said the spirit inside me shone bright, brighter than anything she had felt in a long time. She needed to see it up close to know if it was true, and it was. Those words stayed with me long after she disappeared into the wilderness, her figure swallowed by trees and distance until she was only a memory carried on the wind. For days after she left, the cabin felt different, as if her presence had woven itself into the walls. I kept replaying the moment she pressed her hand over my heart, her voice low and certain, promising that our spirits were now tied. I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the poetry of her people, but the truth sat deeper. Something had shifted inside me. I felt it every time the wind moved through the valley, carrying whispers I couldn't quite understand. About a week later, trouble found me. A pair of outlaws wandered onto my land, the same kind of men who could have easily been the ones who hurt her. They weren't looking to talk. They wanted my horses, my supplies, and anything else worth stealing. When I stood in their way, the first bullet grazed my shoulder. I ducked behind a rock, bleeding, outnumbered, and wishing for the first time in my life that I wasn't alone. Then the wind changed. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't hope. It was a shift in the air so sudden it made the hair on my arms rise. And through the brush came Nayeli, riding like the desert itself had carried her to me. Behind her were 2 Apache warriors, bows drawn, eyes fixed with deadly calm. The outlaws never stood a chance. Within moments, they were disarmed and fleeing, lucky to escape with their lives. When the danger passed, Nayeli dismounted and walked to me with that same steady gaze. She placed her hand over my heart again, just as she had that first morning. "I told you," she whispered, "when you call, I will come." And standing there beneath the open sky, I finally understood. Some bonds are formed by blood, some by fate, and some by the simple act of saving a life and having yours saved in return.